So this is a sample Wsdl. Okay, so every Wsdl will be in a similar format. So that's how it is out there. So the first tag is definitions, then define the message, then you have port type section, then you have binding, and then you have services, and inside services you have port, etc., and that's where it ends. Now the thing is that even if you do not give the your XML tags in the same way in which it has been defined here, even if the service is up and then you have messages, I mean, the parsing of WSDL, wherever it happens, it will be able to figure out like which section it has to look for, because it's not sequential. They look for various sections. Okay, so it's not mandatory to you to for you to maintain the order. Uh, because individual sections are being looked at, that how it is being binded, what is the port type, what is the message, etc. But nothing more than that. Okay, so the order is not important. That's what I'm trying to convey, right? So let's go back and see all the definitions one by one. Now if you see at the top, we have the definition section, right? So definition section is a root. Every WSDL has to start with that and end with that. Here we define the name of the web service and all the namespaces which are being used there. That is what definition stands for. And I have to scroll up and down a bit, so please don't get bogged down by it. I just want to show you this XML. Yes, so see, the definition is here, hello service, and all the namespaces which are being used down, okay, will be defined here. So since it's a simple one, you're not using many namespaces. Only one namespace is being used, which is like say XMLNS, which stands for the normal WSDL schema. So you're not using it. But if you would have defined this as XMLNS colon WSDL, everywhere you would have to use WSDL colon message, WSDL colon port type, WSDL colon binding, which is a normal trend in the industry to do that, but that is not required. So we just mentioned XMLNS, the one normal schema is being used here. So definition, as again to iterate, that is how you start writing a WSDL. Okay, so it is a root tag. All the namespaces which will be used will be defined here. The name of the web service will be defined here. So that is what definitions stand for. Okay. Now type. So type basically defines what the data type, right? So let's go back here. And again, excuse me for going up and down. That's how it will work for now, because I only have the sample here. Now this type, if you see, everywhere this type is there. So this type basically says that whatever is the message, what type it has to be. Okay. So here we have used the inbuilt data types of what is already defined in the XML schema definition, such as string. But if you want to define using your own data structure, that also you can do. So you can since it supports XSD, you can import other XSDs where you define your own data structure, and then you can use that same type here. But for simplicity, we have used the inbuilt data types only to show you the message how it should be, not going through like the various complexities which are there. And it's not complex. I said, I'm just saying that let's take a very simple example. Let's go through it, and we'll deal with the complex part slowly and slowly. Now, so the type denotes the data type. It can be string, integer, custom objects, anything. Okay, so that is what type stands for. Then you have message. So what is message? So message is the way in which, this request data, it has to be within a particular XML tag. Like if you go here, you had the request header, this body. Inside this body, it has to be like, say if you are transporting, the root tag is get customer info. So that get customer info tag is the actual, enclosing tags for the body, right? and that is basically the message which has to be the message body which has to be shared between the consumer and the producer or the web service. So that message structure, what is the name of the message, that is is being denoted here as message. So if you go here up and see, this is how we define. So the request, it has to be encapsulated, it has say hello request, okay, and the response will be as say hello response. And inside that message, what all things are there? So right now we just use first name, but you can define everything. It can be first name, last name, age, anything, right? So that is what the definition is, and similarly you can have the response as well. So that is, it basically says that what things you're expecting as part of the request and what things you are expecting as part of the response, that will be defined here. That is what the meaning of message. So let's go back to the next one. So what is port type? So port type is an abstract set of operations mapped to one or more endpoints, defining the collection of operations for a binding. The collection of operations, because it is abstract, can be mapped to multiple transports or various through bindings. Say hello operation that consists of request and response service. Okay, so since it is basically more of a theory, it would have become difficult for you to understand. But let us go through this theory first. We'll go back to the Wsdl and again try to correlate it and understand what the individual elements stand for. So the port type element combines multiple messages elements to form a complete one-way or round-trip operation. So this is going to give you more information as to the other elements which I mentioned there. For example, a port type can combine one request and one response message into a single request/response operation. This is most commonly used in SOAP services. A port type can define multiple operations too. So let's go above and see what exactly it means from the practical point of view. Right, so here you have the port type. So port type is nothing but, you can say say port is, now port type is basically like say the various protocols which are available which can be used for accessing the service, right? They're all accessing on various ports, and port type is nothing but the operations which are open for for getting access from this particular Wsdl. They're all defined within this port type. Okay, now one by one you define, like it has say hello or say log out, anything, all the operations, and what is the input and the output which is expected, all can be defined here in this port type. Okay, now once you define this port type, the next part which you have is the binding. So what does binding mean? So it binds this port type with the actual with the actual, like the SOAP service. So if you see here the binding which is defined, it says that, and this is the name of the binding, it defines the port type, right? And it defines that which is the which are the operations and what is the protocol which will be used here. So here we have use the HTTP protocol. If you see here, schemas.xml soap.r/soap/HTTP. So it basically means that it's going to be a HTTP protocol binding. We are going to access it via HTTP protocol. RPC stands for that the way in which the XML would be structured would be a remote procedure call, right? So that's what you basically define that how this operation will be accessed over which protocol, that is being defined here. Okay, and whichever operations are eligible for this binding, they are being defined. Okay, so since we only had one operation and it was eligible for it, we have mentioned it here. But say if we had two operations and only one of the operations was accessible over HTTP, we would have mentioned only one operation here. So this section binding basically binds the port type with the protocol. Okay, now, and that's what will be written down also. We'll go and again check. The next section is for services. So services basically means that now this binding is there, right? Now this binding has to say, now service name, we know that this what service this particular WSL stands for, because the definition section which was there at the top, that had the name. But this section, what it does is that it binds the URL with the binding. So this is a binding, right? Hello underscore binding. So this is one of the bindings. You can have 5 or 6 different bindings in a service, although normally I've seen the case that it's only one. Okay, so if we define five or six different bindings, right, and yes, if you define 5 or 6 different bindings, then you'll have 5 different definitions here, that 5 different services names here. Okay, because service basically means that you're binding, that you're defining that for this particular binding, what is the URL, like how you can access it. So if you're defined for a particular service 5 different bindings, you have to define 5 different services here. Okay, so that basically is a relationship between the URL, I mean what is the URL in which it can be accessed, the one which has been defined here, and the actual binding, like what is the protocol over which it has to be used, etc. Okay, now having said this, since we have defined this binding, the binding of the URL, but this binding is only an initial way. If you want, there is a way to override it also. Okay, so from coding perspective, you can go ahead and override it. It's not hard and fast that once it's defined in the Wsdl, you cannot change it later. Okay, so that's how you should understand it. Let us go back and see what all elements are he defined here. So port type we've already seen, the binding is basically binding between the port type and the actual protocol and the style which should be used. So this, in some way or other, this data has to reflect in the definition which I have mentioned here. So binding is nothing but the concrete protocol and the data formats for the operations and messages defined for a particular port type. So direction to use a SOAP HTTP transfer protocol, the binding element provides specific details on how a port type operation which actually be transmitted over the wire. So which essentially means that how the port type is related to a particular transport, like which transport will be used. For in the example which I gave here, we are using HTTP transport, and that's why it has been defined like this. Okay, now coming back to service. So again, to draw a parallelism, what is a service? So service is basically you have I mean it's a relationship between the binding and the URL which will be used to access that binding, right? And let's see whether that same definition is shown here or not, or if something else is expressed. Service is a collection of related endpoints encompassing the service definition in the file. The service map the binding to the port and include any extensible definition. So it's basically binding the port and the it maps the binding to the port. So whatever binding has there and whatever is the port, basically the URL, you map it here, and so that this is how it is accessed. So if you define a particular location there, that is what that location, when the web service is deployed, it is ready for getting accessed from that particular location. Okay, the service element defines the ports supported by the web service by the web services. For each of the supported protocols, there is one port element. The service element is a collection of ports. Again, so for it basically means that binding between the relationship between the binding and the URL is what is called as a port, and one particular service can have multiple ports depending on how many bindings you have. So these were the major parts till now. Uh, is it clear to you guys, like what are the constituent elements of a WSDL? Guys, is it clear to you what are the constituent elements of a WSDL? What would other folks have you understood? Arti, Raghav, Reena. Yes, for creating a SOAP based web services, we need to publish the WSDL. When you say publish, in the sense that maybe not to a UDI, but in your code itself, you need to, like, say, when you publish it, basically means that this, I mean, the necessary, configuration is done so that it can be accessed via that URL. So basically, you need that publishing part of the WSDL, and we'll see one practical example also, so you'll understand from there. So that is also my like plan. But the thing is that if you do it over two classes, right? I thought I can club it today, but if you would have clubbed it, it would have become too much for you to handle it in one day. So I thought I'll do it in the next class, so that in between, if you want to revise, you can. Yeah, sure, Raghav. What would others? I mean, are you able to understand? Aarti, what would you? Shraddha, Shravan, are you able to understand? Guys, are you able to understand? Please let me know. I mean, if not, if you want me to repeat, I can some of the sections. Not a problem. Okay. Okay. Aarti, what about you? Are you understanding? Okay, so I assume that you're understanding. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Okay. Now, apart from what we discussed, there's some other tags as well, which is again, I mean, important, but again, not that much. So one is import statement, whatever has been defined here. So I was telling you about XSDs, right? So till now we have used only common inbuilt XSD types, like say XSD colon string, etc. But that is not always the case, right? That is not always the case. So if you want to define your own inbuilt XSD, you can go at the top and define it. You can define a type section and define your XSDs, and you can use that XSD in the sections below. But the common way to do things in such scenarios is that you define a separate XSD where all the message definitions are there, and from this WSDL you just import those XSDs, right? And then start using the parts which you want to. So that is what import statement stands for. You can import if you want other WSDL documents, or the more common implementation is to use XSDs, right? XML schema definitions, which can be imported. Okay. Now coming back to documentation, so there's one section for documentation as well. There you can mention all the history in the world you want to, for anyone else to understand your services, and it is good. I mean, documentation is very important, so we should always keep on doing it. Okay. Now coming back to the next one, which I mentioned, port associates a binding in the URI. So, and service is a collection of ports, right? So that is the last part which has been defined. So for this port, let's go back, and I just want to give you another brief round of what to say, recap session for the WSL, because it might be difficult for you to understand. So let's start from backwards, from downwards. So what is a service? So service is a collection of ports. What is a port? Port is a relationship between the binding and the URL where the binding where the service is accessed. So a service can have thousands of ports defined depending on different URLs or different bindings which are available for that particular service. But here we have only one binding, one URL, you have defined it once, right? That's where it ends. Now coming back above binding. So what is the binding? So binding is that uh, one set of, like, the way in which you send a request and the way in which you get the response. So that request and response message structure, right? That is available over which all protocols, and what is the style of transferring, whether it is remote procedure call or anything else, or and the transport protocol is HTTP or anything else. That binding between the request and the response message communication, that is called as binding. Okay. Now So binding basically means the relationship between the transport protocol and the port type. Now coming to port type, what is port type? So port type basically means all the operations which are defined, basically all the methods which are defined within that service. Okay, and what are the XML structures to request for that data, and what is the expected response that is being defined in this port type section. Okay, so that is the port type here. Now we have a message section where you actually define the nitty gritties, that what is the hello request stands for, what is hello response stands for. So this is what we have defined here. And then your definition, which is a root tag. So this is on high level is what your Wsdl is for. So it's pretty much intuitive if you keep doing it number of times. But the thing is that most times you might not be writing it also, because I mean it's not that every day you write a new service, right? It's been defined once in a blue moon and then everyone uses it for a long time. And then you modify certain elements, you add certain elements. So that's the work which keeps on going, but every day you do not define a new WSDL, but still you should know how the different structures are structured together. So that's all I had for today. And today we only had theory session because I wanted you to understand about the theoretical concepts. In next class we're going to have a practical example about the web services. Then we are going to have uh, how to test this web service using another tool, SOAP UI, and that's where we'll end the next class. But before we do that, I just want you guys as an assignment to go ahead, go through this data, right, and make sure that you understand the concepts very well, because they're very very basic things, and that's all what WSL web service is all about. I mean, there's nothing more to it. To understand this much, you have understood a lot. Okay. So is it clear till now, guys? Any questions? We are wrapping up the session. So if there is any question you want to ask, and please go ahead.